So we'll start with your Monday, Thursday. You're going to start with the 90-90 internal, external rotation stretches. So I'm going to use Derek to show the 90-90 position. It's going to look exactly like it sounds. So it's called the 90-90 position because both knees should be in a 90-degree angle, okay? It's really simple. We're going to start with the variation that stretches the external hip capsule first, so the outside of the hip and the glutes. So what Derek's going to do, he's actually going to turn towards his front leg. So where Derek wants to feel this stretch is right on the outside of this front hip, okay? The more you turn into that leg and kind of rotate this way, the more you're going to feel the stretch on the outside of the hip. So you might have to play around with the position a little bit. Just make sure that this front leg, you're getting in the outside of the hip. It's really that simple. You're going to hold it for 3 minutes. You're going to just breathe, relax, in through your nose, out through your max, and don't go into a maximal stretch to start the stretch. You just want to get into a place where it's just a little uncomfortable, and you want to breathe and work your way and just relax into it deeper and deeper. Don't try to force it. All right, so he's going to do that for 3 minutes. Then here comes the sticky position that I want to talk about a little bit more, which I don't think we've really addressed that much in our programs, or people address at all, but I think is actually the most important position and flexibility needed for anybody, including definitely athletes. So if Derek just wants to relax for a minute, he doesn't actually have to do the stretch. I want to talk about a little bit about internal hip rotation. So the biggest thing you see these days is everyone cues knees out, hips out, like everything's very much here, okay? I think it's probably the most overused cue of all time, okay? Most people, the reason that cue exists is because when people were squatting, when they squat down, their knees collapse in, okay? So if you're one of those guys that for whatever reason, when you squat and your knees collapse in this bad, then it might work for you to keep thinking about rotating the knees out so the hips go over the knees. But one of the biggest things that your hips also need to be able to do is actually rotate in. And a lot of people can't actually rotate their hip in, so what they experience is knee valgus and they get pain on the inside of their knee. So if your hips can't rotate, other joints that aren't as built as much for rotation, hence like your knee, is going to try to do the rotation for you. So you're going to get a lot of pain and discomfort in the inside of that knee when your hip can't rotate in. The other reason it's super important, because if you're an explosive athlete and you're already externally rotated, you can't generate power from the outside of your hips. So if you're trying to change direction or move laterally or do any movement like that, you're already in its end range, so you can't create a whole lot of power. If you're starting from internal rotation, you can actually use the glutes and push out more, so you can actually generate more power from the hips. Not only that, when you're squatting, or when you're going into hip flexion, so when the hips bend like this, the hips actually have to internally rotate. So the way anatomically that your hips are designed is when you go past 90 degrees, so when you're past this position, the hips actually have to rotate in, otherwise you jam up the hip capsule and the bones don't move inside the hip capsule, so you're grinding your hip capsule. Now because training in the United States comes predominantly from powerlifting, that cue only works for a powerlifting style squat when you're super wide. You want to focus on keeping the hips out. But as soon as you go past 90 degrees, the hips actually have to rotate in. So if you see a lot of Olympic weightlifters, people, they catch and people see that their hips are like in like this. That's because when you're that deep in a squat, your hips actually need to be able to rotate in. And a lot of people can't rotate their hips in. So we're going to show you a stretch that's going to allow you to open up that range and get internal rotation. So now Derek's going to turn towards his back leg. So Derek's actually going to rotate towards his back leg. So this is a very interesting sensation that you're going to get. Where you want to feel this is, you're going to feel it deep inside the hip capsule. Okay, so a lot of people are going to feel it kind of across here, like the piriformis and glute medius, but you might also feel it underneath inside the hip capsule. We just want to make sure that anywhere the joint is closing angle, so right here would be where the hip and the femur come in. If you feel pinching on top of there, then one thing Derek will be able to do is maybe lean away. So he could lean away a little bit so he can actually focus on getting that hip to rotate in. So if you're feeling blocked up here, you can lean away, or the other option would be you can straighten out this leg. That's going to allow you to keep your torso more upright. so so he can focus on that. And as you can see, he can really actually turn this way. Yeah, there we go. He actually wants to focus on being able to turn this hip inwards like that. Good. So that would be your other 3-minute hold. So again, this one's going to feel pretty gnarly inside the hip there. So just again, don't go to a maximal stretch. If you feel like something's jammed up, try to play with your torso position a little bit, your chest, and kind of move it around and see if you can free up this hip if you can't stay totally upright facing this hip. But the biggest thing is our external rotation was towards the front. On this one, we actually want to rotate towards the back leg. Because as we rotate this way, the hip rotates this way. If he rotates like this, well then now this hip isn't going to get the stretch you need. So he actually wants to keep his chest twisted towards the back leg for the internal rotation. So again, you're going to feel that way deep in there, but it's super important range of motion to have. Not only that, you see a lot of guys that walk around like this because their hips, they have no internal rotation, so when they walk with their feet out. So you want to be able to walk with your feet in. Your hips have that ability to rotate in and rotate out. It's super important.